When we give y'all auntie advice and tell y'all to leave that man alone, we are telling y'all that for your good, not in any way, shape, or form for hate, okay? So I know somebody told you, Danita Jackson, to leave him alone, and you chose not to, and now he is out to glory and you sitting in a jail cell. I know they told you. It's documented that y'all had DV issues in the past. So somebody told you on some auntie advice, leave him alone, and you should have did that, okay, my love? But now you're sitting in jail. So Monday morning in the early hours, Danita Jackson, who is a track athlete, as well as her boyfriend Kevaughn Goldson, he is actually from Jamaica, and they were both Lincoln University track and field athletes. She actually came home early from work. She does live off campus. When she got to the home, she states that she heard people talking in her roommate's room, so she used a hair clip to end.
On February 21st, 2026, in Jefferson City, a night that began like any other ended in a deadly fight. Kevaughn Goldson, a 23-year-old college senior and sprinter at Lincoln University, went to his girlfriend's apartment to spend the night. The next day, police say his girlfriend, Danita Jackson, returned home from work early. She said she could not find him. She searched the apartment. Then she forced her way into her roommate's bedroom. Inside that room, everything changed. A physical struggle followed. A knife was used. Kevaughn was rushed to the hospital. He later died during surgery. Danita Jackson has been charged with armed criminal action and second-degree murder. She says she acted in self-defense. This video breaks down the full timeline, the background of the victim, and the key questions in this case. Before we begin, if stories the media ignore deserve justice, then subscribe to Unseen Crime Dossiers right now. Like this video so more people can see the truth. And comment below if you believe these voices deserve to be heard. Share this story, because awareness can change everything. Welcome to Unseen Crime Dossiers, where the stories the world tries to forget are finally uncovered. Stay with us, because every case you'll see is shocking, true, and you won't want to miss a single detail. Kevaughn Goldson was 23 years old at the time of his death. At this stage of life, he was in early adulthood, a period when many people focus on education, personal growth, and long-term goals. Being 23 also meant he had already spent several years in higher education and athletic training. His age placed him among senior college students who are close to finishing their studies and preparing for the next phase of their lives. This period usually involves balancing responsibilities, planning for graduation, and thinking about career opportunities. His daily routine likely included structured schedules that combined academics, athletics, and personal commitments, which is common for student athletes at the university level. Kevaughn Goldson was originally from Jamaica. Jamaica is widely known for its strong track and field culture and for producing many skilled sprinters who compete at international levels. Growing up in Jamaica may have influenced his interest in sprinting and competitive athletics, as running is a major part of sports culture in the country. Moving from Jamaica to the United States for college suggests a major life transition that involved adapting to a new environment, different academic systems, and a new social setting. International students often manage challenges such as cultural adjustments, academic expectations, and distance from family members who remain in their home country. He was a sprinter on the track team at Lincoln University, where he competed in short-distance running events. Sprinting requires speed, discipline, and consistent training. Athletes in this category usually practice several days a week, focusing on technique, endurance, and strength conditioning. Participation in college athletics involves scheduled practices, competitions, and team activities that are coordinated by coaching staff. As a member of a collegiate track team, Kevaughn would have followed structured training programs designed to improve performance and maintain physical fitness. Track athletes also travel for meets and represent their university in competitions, which adds another layer of responsibility alongside academic duties. At the time of the incident, Kevaughn was a senior in college. Senior status means he was in the final stage of his undergraduate education. This level typically involves completing final coursework, meeting graduation requirements, and preparing for life after college. Seniors often work on final projects, internships, or career planning steps to help them transition into professional life. Managing both academics and athletics during a senior year requires organization and time management, especially for student athletes who must meet eligibility standards while maintaining training schedules. His position as a senior indicates he had already invested multiple years in both his education and athletic development. As a student athlete, his academic and athletic roles were connected. Universities expect student athletes to maintain academic progress while representing their school in sports programs. This dual responsibility means attending classes, completing assignments, and participating in team practices and competitions. Being part of a university sports program also involves following team rules, maintaining fitness levels, and attending official events. His involvement in athletics suggests a structured lifestyle built around discipline, physical preparation, and academic participation within the campus environment. Regarding future plans, a senior athlete in his final year would likely have been considering several possible paths. These could include graduating and seeking employment, continuing athletic training, or pursuing opportunities related to sports, education, or other professional fields. Some college sprinters aim to compete at higher levels, while others focus on careers outside of athletics after completing their degrees. Preparing for graduation often includes updating resumes, exploring job opportunities, and planning long-term living arrangements. As an international student, future planning may also involve decisions about remaining in the United States or returning to the home country after graduation. Overall, Kevaughn Goldson's background reflects a profile of a young international college athlete who was nearing completion of his university journey. He was a 23-year-old senior, originally from Jamaica, actively involved in collegiate track and field while pursuing his education. His life structure likely revolved around training, academic work, and preparation for post-graduation opportunities. These factors provide context about his daily routine, responsibilities, and stage of life at the time, without extending beyond the known details of his identity as a student, athlete, and senior nearing the end of his college experience. The relationship between Kevaughn Goldson and Danita Jackson was described in reports as long-term and complex. Statements given to authorities suggested that they had been involved with each other for several years, indicating that their connection was not recent or casual. A multi-year relationship often includes shared routines, repeated interactions, and ongoing communication patterns that develop over time. When a relationship lasts for years, it typically goes through different phases, including periods of stability and periods of disagreement. The duration alone suggests that both individuals were familiar with each other's habits, behaviors, and personal reactions during conflicts. According to information referenced in investigative summaries, the relationship had a history of being described as volatile. The term volatile in this context means that the relationship may have involved frequent tension, disagreements, or sudden changes in mood during interactions. Volatile dynamics do not necessarily mean constant conflict, but they often point to recurring instability. When authorities note volatility in a relationship, they're usually referring to a pattern rather than a single isolated disagreement. This kind of pattern can develop when communication breakdowns, unresolved disputes, or emotional triggers occur repeatedly over time. Reports also indicated that arguments were not uncommon between the two individuals. In long-term relationships, disagreements can happen for many reasons, including misunderstandings, personal stress, or lifestyle differences. Repeated arguments may suggest ongoing unresolved issues rather than one-time disputes. Investigators often look at prior disagreements to understand whether a situation escalated suddenly or followed an existing pattern of conflict. A history of disputes can help establish context about how interactions typically unfolded between both parties before the final incident occurred. The nature of past disagreements was not fully detailed in public summaries, but references to ongoing tension suggest that conflicts may have been part of the relationship's routine interactions. When disagreements become frequent, they can influence how individuals respond during high-stress moments. Patterns of arguing may also affect communication style, including how issues are addressed, how quickly situations escalate, and how conflicts are resolved. Understanding prior arguments is important because it helps explain the environment in which the final encounter took place, especially when investigators attempt to reconstruct timelines and behavior leading up to the incident. The most recent disagreement mentioned in statements to police reportedly involved a broken bottle of cologne. While the object itself may appear minor, disputes in relationships are not always about the item involved, but about underlying tension connected to it. Small incidents can become points of conflict if previous issues remain unresolved. In many cases, a minor event can act as a trigger that leads to a larger argument, especially in relationships that already have a documented history of tension. Investigators often note such details because they provide insight into the immediate circumstances preceding a major altercation. Focusing on the reported Kevaughn dispute, it represents the last known argument referenced before the fatal incident occurred. This detail may be considered relevant because it establishes a recent point of disagreement between the individuals. When law enforcement documents the most recent conflict, it helps create a chronological understanding of events and emotional context leading into the final interaction. Even small disagreements are documented in case analysis because they may show whether tensions were escalating in the days or hours before a confrontation took place. Overall, the available information presents the relationship as one that lasted for years, included repeated disagreements, and was characterized in reports as unstable at times. The mention of volatility, prior arguments, and a recent dispute over a broken bottle of cologne provides a structured outline of the relationship's dynamics as described in official statements. These elements are often examined during investigations to understand behavioral patterns, the progression of conflict, and the circumstances that may have contributed to the confrontation that ultimately occurred. On February 21st, 2026, the sequence of events began when Kevaughn Goldson went to his girlfriend's apartment in Jefferson City. According to statements provided to investigators, he had planned to spend time there and stay overnight. Visiting a partner's residence is a routine activity in many long-term relationships, especially when both individuals are familiar with the living environment. The apartment setting becomes important in this timeline because it was a primary location where all key events later unfolded. His presence inside the apartment established the starting point for the series of actions that would later be reviewed by law enforcement. The next development in the timeline involved Anita Jackson leaving the apartment to go to work. Based on her account to authorities, she followed her normal work schedule after Kevaughn remained at the residence. This detail is relevant because it indicates that he was still inside the apartment while she was away. When one person remains at a residence while the other leaves, investigators often examine timelines, phone records, and witness statements to understand movements and interactions during that period. Her departure for work marks the first separation in the timeline between both individuals on that day. At some point during her work shift, Danita stated that she was not feeling well and decided to leave early. Leaving work earlier than scheduled introduces a change in routine, which becomes a significant factor when reconstructing the sequence of events. In investigative timelines, any deviation from normal daily plans is carefully reviewed because it can affect the timing of later encounters. Her decision to return home ahead of schedule meant that she arrived back at the apartment earlier than originally expected, which directly influenced the events that followed shortly after her arrival. Upon returning to the apartment, she reported that she expected to find Kevaughn inside the residence. However, according to her statement, he was not immediately visible when she entered. This moment becomes a key transitional point in the timeline because it marks a shift from a normal return home to an active search within the apartment. Investigators often examine how individuals behave upon re-entering a shared space, including whether they call out, check rooms, or attempt to make contact. Her inability to immediately locate him led to further actions that escalated the situation. After noticing that he was not in the common areas of the apartment, she began searching different sections of the residence. Searching an apartment typically involves checking spaces, such as the living room, bathroom, and bedroom areas. This step is important in understanding how much time passed between her arrival and the eventual discovery. The act of searching also indicates that she believed he was still somewhere inside the apartment rather than having left the premises. In investigative reviews, this portion of the timeline helps establish movement patterns within the living space and clarifies whether there were any interruptions or delays before the confrontation occurred. The timeline then progressed to the moment she approached her roommate's bedroom. According to her statement to police, the door to that room was closed. A closed door inside a shared apartment can create uncertainty about who is inside or what activity is taking place. At this stage, the sequence shifted from a routine search to a more direct action involving entry into a private space within the residence. Investigators often focus on this exact moment because it represents the final step before the direct encounter that led to the altercation described in later reports. She stated that she forced the roommate's bedroom door open after being unable to locate Kevaughn elsewhere in the apartment. Forcing entry into the room marked the final action in this portion of the timeline and directly led to the discovery that preceded the physical confrontation. In investigative reconstructions, this moment is considered a critical turning point because it connects the earlier search phase with the immediate events that followed. The sequence from arrival to searching to forced entry provides a structured timeline that helps authorities understand how the situation escalated within a confined residential setting on that specific date. The confrontation began at the moment Danita Jackson entered her roommate's bedroom inside the apartment in Jefferson City. According to her statement to investigators, she found Kevaughn Goldson in the roommate's bed. This discovery marked the first direct contact between them after she returned home earlier than expected. The setting of the encounter is important because it was a private bedroom within a shared residence, not a common living space. Law enforcement typically evaluates the location of a discovery to determine proximity, visibility, and possible witness involvement. At this stage of the timeline, the situation shifted from searching the apartment to a direct face-to-face interaction. Following the discovery, Danita told authorities that she approached Kevaughn and grabbed him by his shirt. This action, as described in official reports, initiated physical contact between the two individuals. When physical contact begins during a dispute, investigators analyze how the interaction escalated and which actions occurred in sequence. The bedroom environment likely limited movement because bedrooms often contain large furniture, such as beds, dressers, and side tables. Confined spaces can affect how quickly a confrontation intensifies and how individuals maneuver during a struggle. This marks the transition from verbal or visual confrontation into a physical altercation. Danita alleged that during the struggle, Kevaughn kicked her in the stomach. Allegations of physical force are central to claims of self-defense, so investigators closely review such statements. In situations involving reported kicking, law enforcement may look for medical documentation, physical marks, or witness accounts to verify or challenge a claim. The timing of the alleged kick is also significant because it helps determine whether the force occurred before or after other actions escalated. Establishing the order of events is critical when reconstructing a confrontation, especially when criminal charges depend on whether force was defensive or aggressive. She further stated that after the alleged kick, Kevaughn began choking her. Claims of choking are treated seriously in criminal investigations because they involve direct physical restraint and potential risk to breathing. In cases where choking is reported, authorities often look for medical indicators, such as bruising, redness, or swelling around the neck area. They may also consider whether there were witnesses, defensive wounds, or other physical evidence that aligns with the statement given. The presence or absence of corroborating evidence can influence how investigators assess credibility and determine whether the reported sequence aligns with forensic findings. During the altercation, Danita reported that she noticed a knife under the roommate's bed. The discovery of a weapon inside the immediate environment becomes a key turning point in the confrontation. Investigators typically examine the origin of the weapon, ownership, accessibility, and whether it was stored intentionally or coincidentally in that location. The placement of the knife under the bed raises questions about how visible it was and how quickly it could have been retrieved. In violent encounters, the proximity of a weapon can significantly alter the course of events within seconds. She stated that she grabbed the knife and stabbed Kevaughn in the back and chest area during the struggle. The act of using a knife introduces lethal force into the situation. In criminal investigations, the number of wounds, their location, and the angle of entry are analyzed by medical examiners to reconstruct positioning and movement during the incident. These forensic details often play a major role in determining whether the use of force aligns with a claim of self-defense. Authorities examine whether the force used was proportional to the alleged threat at the time it occurred. After the stabbing, Danita contacted emergency services by calling 911. Placing the call marked the final step in this confrontation timeline. Emergency calls are typically recorded, and investigators review them to analyze tone, urgency, statements made, and the timing of the request for help. The gap between the reported altercation and the call to authorities is also examined to determine immediacy. Once first responders arrived, medical assistance was provided, and the case transitioned from a private altercation to a formal criminal investigation. This sequence, from discovery to emergency call, forms the core framework that authorities continue to evaluate as legal proceedings move forward. After the reported stabbing incident inside the apartment in Jefferson City, emergency services were contacted and medical responders were dispatched to the scene. When first responders arrive at a violent incident, their priority is to assess injuries, stabilize the patient, and determine the level of urgency required for transport. In this case, Kevaughn Goldson was found with serious injuries that required immediate medical attention. Emergency personnel typically perform rapid evaluations, including checking breathing, pulse, blood loss, and responsiveness, before deciding the fastest method of transport to a medical facility. Kevaughn was initially transported to a local emergency room for urgent treatment. Emergency rooms are equipped to handle critical injuries and provide immediate stabilization procedures such as controlling bleeding, administering fluids, and conducting preliminary examinations. Upon arrival at the ER, medical staff would have followed trauma response protocols, which often include imaging scans, monitoring vital signs, and preparing for possible surgical intervention. Law enforcement officers were also present during this stage and reportedly attempted to speak with him while he was receiving treatment, which is standard procedure in cases involving violent incidents. Due to the severity of his injuries, medical professionals determined that a higher level of care was necessary. When a patient's condition exceeds the treatment capacity of a local hospital, doctors may authorize a transfer to a larger or more specialized medical facility. In trauma cases, this decision is based on factors such as internal injuries, blood loss, and the need for specialized surgical teams. The assessment made by the medical staff indicated that advanced treatment resources were required to address the extent of the wounds he sustained. Following this evaluation, Kevaughn was airlifted to a second hospital for more intensive medical care. Air medical transport is typically used when time-sensitive injuries require faster relocation than ground transportation can provide. Helicopter transfers are often reserved for critical trauma patients because they significantly reduce travel time and allow continuous monitoring during transport. During the flight, medical personnel usually provide ongoing stabilization efforts, including oxygen support, monitoring of vital signs, and emergency interventions if the patient's condition worsens. Upon arrival at the second hospital, he was placed under the care of a surgical team for emergency treatment. In trauma situations involving stab wounds, surgery is often required to repair internal damage, stop internal bleeding, and stabilize vital organs. Surgical teams conduct rapid assessments to determine the extent of injuries and prioritize life-saving procedures. The decision to move directly into surgery indicates that his condition was considered critical and required immediate operative intervention rather than extended observation. Despite the medical efforts made by healthcare professionals, Kevaughn died during surgery. When a patient dies during a surgical procedure, it typically means that the injuries were severe enough that medical intervention was unable to reverse the damage. Medical examiners and hospital staff later document the cause and manner of death based on clinical findings, surgical observations, and forensic evaluations. This documentation becomes an essential part of both the medical record and the legal investigation that follows a fatal incident. The medical response timeline, from emergency dispatch to local ER treatment to airlift transfer and finally surgical intervention, provides a structured account of how healthcare systems respond to critical trauma cases. Each step reflects escalating levels of medical care based on the patient condition and the resources required to attempt stabilization. These records are often reviewed by investigators, legal teams, and medical experts to establish the sequence of treatment and understand how the injuries progress from the time of the incident to the point of death during surgery. Following the fatal outcome of the incident, law enforcement officials moved forward with formal legal action based on the information gathered during the investigation. After reviewing initial statements, physical evidence, and medical findings, authorities charged Anita Jackson in connection with the death of Kevaughn Goldson. When charges are filed in a violent death case, investigators typically rely on witness accounts, forensic analysis, medical reports, and recorded timelines to determine whether criminal statutes apply. The filing of charges does not determine guilt, but signals that prosecutors believe there is sufficient probable cause to proceed through the legal system. One of the primary charges filed was armed criminal action. This charge is commonly applied when a dangerous weapon is allegedly used during commission of a felony offense. In many jurisdictions, the presence and use of a weapon during a confrontation significantly increases the legal severity of a case. Prosecutors often evaluate how the weapon was obtained, how it was used, and whether its use was intentional within the sequence of events. The legal definition of armed criminal action focuses on whether a weapon played a direct role in the act that led to serious injury or death, regardless of the setting in which the incident occurred. In addition to the weapon-related charge, Danita Jackson was also charged with second-degree murder. Second-degree murder generally refers to a killing that is intentional but not premeditated, or a death caused by actions that show a disregard for human life. This classification differs from first-degree murder, which typically involves planning or premeditation. Prosecutors use second-degree murder charges when they believe the act that caused the death occurred during a confrontation or escalation rather than through a long-term planned act. The specific elements of this charge are later evaluated in court through evidence presentation and legal arguments. The prosecution's decision to file these charges suggests that investigators concluded the use of lethal force during the altercation met the legal threshold for serious criminal liability. During the charging phase, legal authorities examined factors such as the sequence of events, the level of force used, and the physical evidence collected at the scene. Medical examiner findings, including wound locations and cause of death, often play a key role in determining the appropriate legal classification. These details help prosecutors establish whether the actions taken during the confrontation were consistent with criminal statutes related to homicide and weapon use. At the same time, Danita Jackson stated to authorities that she acted in self-defense. A self-defense claim introduces a legal argument that the use of force was necessary to prevent immediate harm. In legal proceedings, self-defense is not automatically accepted and must be supported by evidence that shows a reasonable perception of danger at the time of the incident. Courts typically analyze whether the threat was immediate, whether the response was proportional, and whether there were alternative options available before lethal force was used. This claim becomes a central issue that both the defense and prosecution examine closely. When self-defense is raised in a homicide case, investigators often review physical injuries on both individuals' witness statements and the environment where the incident occurred. Evidence such as medical records, forensic reports, and recorded emergency calls can influence how the claim is evaluated. Legal teams may also examine the history of the relationship, prior conflicts, and the timeline leading up to the confrontation. The burden then shifts to the court to determine whether the circumstances legally justify the use of force or whether the actions exceed what is considered reasonable under the law. As the case moves through the judicial process, the charges of armed criminal action and second-degree murder will be formally examined in court proceedings. This process may include preliminary hearings, evidence review, witness testimony, and legal motions presented by both sides. The outcome will ultimately depend on how the court interprets the evidence, the credibility of statements, and the legal standards surrounding self-defense. Until a final verdict is reached, the charges represent formal allegations that are subject to review through the structured legal system. The investigation into the incident involving Kevaughn Goldson and Danita Jackson raises several key questions that authorities and legal analysts are examining. One of the primary considerations is whether the force used during the confrontation was reasonable. Reasonable force is evaluated in the context of self-defense laws, which require that any response be proportionate to the perceived threat. In this case, investigators are assessing whether the actions taken during the struggle, including the use of a knife, were a measured response to the situation or exceeded what would be considered legally justified under the circumstances. Another critical question concerns the presence of immediate danger. Self-defense claims typically depend on whether the individual faced a clear and present threat of bodily harm at the time force was applied. Authorities must determine if Kevaughn's alleged actions, such as kicking or choking, created a situation where Danita had no alternative but to defend herself. Establishing the timing and severity of the threat is essential to understanding whether the defensive actions were necessary to prevent serious injury or death. The evidence supporting self-defense is also under review. Investigators are examining statements from both parties, physical evidence at the scene, and any witness accounts that may confirm or contradict the sequence of events. Items such as injuries consistent with defensive actions, the location and accessibility of a knife, and progression of the physical altercation are all factors that help determine whether the claim of self-defense is credible. Legal teams often use this information to argue whether the response aligns with what a reasonable person would do in similar circumstances. Medical reports provide additional insight into the dynamics of the incident. Examination of Kevaughn's injuries, including the number, depth, and placement of stab wounds, is crucial to reconstructing the struggle. Similarly, any documented injuries on Danita can indicate defensive reactions. Forensic analysis of these medical findings helps establish the sequence of events, the intensity of the confrontation, and whether the force applied matches the level of threat described in the statements. Medical documentation serves as a factual reference that both prosecution and defense rely on during legal proceedings. Prior reports of violence in the relationship are another area of focus. Investigators review any history of disputes, documented incidents, or patterns of conflict between the two individuals. Previous altercations can inform understanding of behavioral tendencies and help determine whether the confrontation was an isolated event or part of a recurring dynamic. These historical details are often relevant in evaluating claims of self-defense and in understanding how prior interactions may have influenced the escalation of the incident. The credibility of both party statements is weighed alongside the collected evidence. Authorities assess whether accounts are consistent with the physical layout of the apartment, the positioning of individuals, and the reported sequence of actions. Discrepancies or corroborations are considered in determining the reliability of testimonies and how they align with the forensic and medical evidence. This evaluation helps clarify which elements of the incident are substantiated and which require further examination in a legal context. Ultimately, these key questions guide the ongoing investigation and legal analysis of the case, determining the reasonableness of force, the immediacy of danger, the supporting evidence for self-defense, the implications of medical reports, and the impact of any prior conflicts allows authorities to build a structured understanding of the incident. Each factor is critical for both the prosecution and the defense as they prepare to present their arguments, with the goal of establishing a factual and legal framework for the court to consider during trial proceedings. The legal process for Danita Jackson began after charges were formally filed in connection with the death of Kevaughn Goldson. Once prosecutors submitted the charges, the court scheduled initial hearings to address procedural matters, such as verifying the identity of the accused, confirming legal representation, and determining bail or detention status. Preliminary hearings also serve to inform the defendant of the charges, allow counsel to review evidence, and establish the timeline for upcoming legal proceedings. These hearings provide the foundation for how the case will progress through the judicial system. After preliminary matters are addressed, the case may proceed to a formal trial. A trial involves the presentation of evidence by both the prosecution and defense, witness testimonies, and legal arguments regarding the circumstances surrounding the incident. In this stage, attorneys may introduce forensic findings, medical reports, and any relevant prior history to support their positions. Trials also allow the defense to challenge the evidence and present explanations, including claims such as self-defense, to provide context and justification for actions taken during the altercation. The jury plays a central role if the trial reaches that stage. In jurisdictions that use juries for criminal cases, a panel of citizens is tasked with evaluating the evidence presented during the trial. Jurors consider witness credibility, the consistency of statements, physical evidence, and legal standards in order to reach a verdict. The jury's responsibility is to determine whether the prosecution has proven the charges beyond a reasonable doubt or whether the defense has introduced sufficient evidence to support a claim, such as self-defense. Their evaluation is critical because it directly influences the outcome of the case. Once deliberations are complete, the jury delivers a decision, which can result in a conviction or acquittal for each specific charge. A conviction indicates that the court finds the defendant legally responsible for the alleged crimes, whereas an acquittal means the charges were not proven to the required legal standard. In cases involving multiple charges, the jury may convict on some while acquitting on others. The verdict is formally read in court, and it sets the stage for subsequent legal actions, including sentencing or appeals, depending on the outcome. If a conviction occurs, The sentencing phase determines the penalties imposed for crimes. Sentencing can vary widely based on the charges, the severity of the offense, and the defendant's prior criminal record. In cases involving armed criminal action or second-degree murder, legal statutes provide a range of possible prison terms or other penalties. Judges often consider aggravating and mitigating factors, including the circumstances of the incident, any expressions of remorse, and the impact on victims' families when deciding the appropriate sentence. Appeals may follow a conviction, allowing the defendant to challenge aspects of the trial, evidence, or sentencing procedures. Appeals do not automatically overturn verdicts, but provide a legal avenue to review potential errors or procedural issues. Higher courts may affirm the original decision, modify the sentence, or, in some cases, order a retrial. The appellate process adds another layer of legal scrutiny to ensure that the trial and sentencing comply with established laws and due process requirements. Throughout the legal process, all actions are governed by rules designed to protect the rights of both the defendant and the victim while ensuring that justice is pursued systematically. Court hearings, potential trials, jury deliberations, and sentencing decisions are each structured steps intended to establish an official record of proceedings and to determine responsibility under the law. This process is ongoing, and each phase contributes to a comprehensive evaluation of the case, ensuring that all evidence, testimony, and legal arguments are properly considered before a final resolution is reached. Incidents like the one involving Kevaughn Goldson and Danita Jackson highlight broader issues related to relationship violence. Relationship violence encompasses physical, emotional, and psychological harm between partners, and it can occur in both short-term and long-term relationships. Law enforcement and social services often track patterns of such behavior to identify risk factors and intervene before situations escalate. Understanding relationship violence involves recognizing repeated tension, physical confrontations, and disputes that may intensify over time, which will provide important context for how incidents develop. Conflict escalation is another area that receives careful attention in cases of domestic or intimate disputes. Escalation refers to how disagreements or arguments increase in intensity, sometimes moving from verbal exchanges to physical altercations. Experts studying these situations often examine triggers, environmental factors, and individual responses that contribute to a rapid increase in conflict. Evaluating escalation helps authorities determine whether the level of force used in a confrontation was reactive to immediate circumstances, or whether the situation could have been de-escalated through alternative actions. Self-defense laws are central to understanding legal claims in cases involving violent encounters. These laws define conditions under which an individual is legally permitted to use force to protect themselves from harm. Factors considered include whether the threat was immediate, whether the response was proportionate, and whether there were safe options available to avoid using force. Courts assess evidence, witness statements, and forensic findings to evaluate whether actions taken in a confrontation fall within the legal boundaries of self-defense or exceed those limits, influencing both charges and potential outcomes. Examining college campus safety is also relevant when analyzing incidents involving students. Universities and colleges maintain policies and programs designed to protect students from interpersonal violence, including educational initiatives, reporting mechanisms, and emergency response procedures. Campus safety strategies often emphasize prevention, early intervention, and access to resources such as counseling or mediation services. Understanding the safety protocols and environment of a university setting provides context for how incidents are addressed and how support systems can influence outcomes in critical situations. Institutions frequently collaborate with local law enforcement to ensure rapid response to violent incidents. This includes coordinated efforts to investigate allegations, secure evidence, and provide support to affected individuals. Policies governing residence halls, visitor access, and roommate agreements can also affect the dynamics in which confrontations occur. Reviewing these systems allows authorities and campus officials to evaluate whether procedures were followed and whether there are gaps that could be addressed to prevent similar incidents in the future. Broader societal implications are also considered in discussions of relationship violence and self-defense. Research in this field examines patterns of behavior, risk factors for escalation, and outcomes of legal proceedings to inform policies and public awareness campaigns. Understanding these factors contributes to better educational programs for students, clearer guidance for law enforcement, and improved legal frameworks to handle complex interpersonal conflicts. Awareness of broader patterns allows institutions to develop strategies that mitigate risks and promote safer environments for students. Overall, examining relationship violence, conflict escalation, self-defense laws, and campus safety provides a comprehensive perspective on the environment in which incidents occur. These factors interact to shape the context of individual cases and influence how authorities respond, how courts evaluate claims, and how universities develop safety programs. By analyzing these elements, investigators, legal professionals, and campus officials can better understand the circumstances surrounding violent confrontations, implement preventive measures, and provide guidance for handling similar situations in the future. Here at Unseen Crime Dossiers, we're driven by a mission to uncover hidden realities, honor forgotten voices, and keep their memories alive. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, there's more coming that will challenge you even deeper. Make sure to hit subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a case. We're dropping new episodes regularly, and trust us, what's ahead is even more chilling. Before you go, we want to hear from you. What moment hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. Your perspective matters, and your voice helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay alert, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth, because every life deserves to be heard. Thanks you all for watching.